What's going on, guys? Draken1221 here today with a profile of my Dragon deck for Commander or EDH. I figured this would be a good place to start. Anybody who knows me, or maybe you were subscribed previously, know that I love dragons. Any card game, any board game, anything in the realm of dragons, I've always kind of gravitated to or played different card games and things of that nature. So I figured I would kind of showcase and start the channel off with a deck that I've kind of been brewing for about 2 years. It's kind of always changing. It's always in the workshop, but it is something that I've been working on for a while, and I decided I wanted to showcase it, get some feedback from some of the players out there, as well as maybe showcase some of my card choices and kind of get a little community growing with it. So again, today is the Dragon. I got both artworks here to showcase to you. So essentially the deck is Dragon Tribal. It is designed to compete at kind of a stronger EDH table. I'm not a super big advocate for putting numbers on power level, but what I will say is a deck like this, is got a higher budget, and it is as optimized as you can probably get in Dragon deck, or very, very close. If you're looking for something a bit more competitive, I could point you in the direction of like a Scion deck, and that would be kind of fringe competitive level. But as far as competing at a high-end EDH table, this is about as optimized as you can get for a 9-mana commander. So with that said, we'll get started. So Dragon cost Wooburg and 4. It has Eminence, so we've kind of crafted the deck around the Eminence ability. We don't really need the Dragon to hit the board, but if he does hit the board, fantastic. So essentially, Eminence, all dragons cost 1 less to cast, and then it has flying. And then if he does hit the board, whenever he attacks, you draw a card for each attacking dragon, and then you can put a free permanent from your hand onto the board, which is awesome, fantastic. Again, we're not in the category of kind of turboing out the Dragon. We're more abusing the Eminence ability and using that to curve out big, nasty threats, you know, a turn, 2 turns, 3 turns later. So he is kind of he's the commander of the deck. There's a couple other legendary dragons in here you can play, but I think he is the best one for kind of what we're going with here. And again, we've kind of focused around that Eminence ability to curve out easy. So commander, and again, like I said, this is, you know, as optimized as you can get for an Dragon deck. So it is like a Dragon Tribal route, so keep that in mind. So we're going to start with a ramp package. I love creature ramp, so I kind of start with these guys here. Birds of Paradise and Deathrite Shaman. They both cost 1 mana. Birds of Paradise will tap for any color, and then Deathrite Shaman's kind of good at every stage of the game. He's going to utilize your fetch lands as a mana dork, and then he's going to disrupt some graveyard synergies and stuff late in the game, so he's always useful. You know, there's very few things as satisfying as a turn 1 Birds of Paradise or a Deathrite Shaman to kind of set you up for the game. And then to kind of go in conjunction, doesn't cost 1 mana, he costs 2. But it's Bloom Tender. I'm not a huge fan of 2 mana dorks. They have to fulfill a certain category or be very strong. But essentially, Bloom Tender is going to tap for a color for each permanent, each color amongst permanents you control. So if you have all 5 colors on the board, it's going to tap for 5. If you're representing 3 colors, it taps for 3. So it can kind of get you some big mana quickly. So that's why I felt like it deserved a spot as far as mana dorks go. And then the last creature ramp, kind of in a category of its own, is going to be Dockside Extortionist. You don't have to play this card. Again, we have a higher budget. We're kind of trying to optimize this deck. Being that you have a 9-mana commander and you're around Dragon Tribal, which traditionally cost a lot of mana to cast dragons, you're playing this card in a very fair realm. You're not blinking it. You're not abusing the Enter the Battlefield ability. You're going to play it, you're going to get 5, 6, 7 treasures, and you're going to use those treasures to cast some dragons and some gnarly spells. But it's a very fair way. Again, you don't have to play Dockside. You can play any 2-mana ramp card or less that you'd like. You can play Dragon Speaker Shaman, Dragon Lord Servant, which reduce the cost of your dragons, or you could play like a Farseek or something, but I figured with the budget we had, it made sense to play Dockside. Some land ramp here. We're playing 1 copy of Nature's Lore and 1 copy of 3 Visits. They're essentially the same card. 2 mana, grab any forest. So this can grab our shock lands, anything, our triomes, right? Anything with a basic land type. I do want to fit a Farseek in here. I actually cut the Farseek for another card we'll talk about. But I do want to fit the Farseek in here just because it is in that 2 mana early ramp category. Our dragons start costing 4 mana. So if we ramp on turn 2, we could essentially play a big nasty dragon on turn 3. Hopefully it has haste and go from there. So again, you know, if you're playing on a different budget, you can find room for a Farseek. I really want to put that card in here. So these will fix us really quick. And land ramp is always very safe, right? You know, when you're playing just standard EDH, not cEDH, lands are always a safe bet. We're going to go to a couple mana rocks here. We have Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, and Arcane Signet. We're playing 5 colors, so Arcane Signet is kind of a slam dunk here. You know, Soul Ring, and then we have the budget, so we're playing Mana Crypt. Anything that adds multiple mana in this deck, whether it's on a artifact, creature, or land, is always good. I don't want to spend too much time on those. I did want to talk about this really quick. We're playing 1 copy of Jeweled Lotus. You don't have to play this card. I actually cut the Farseek for this. It's a card that I wasn't super high on when I first decided to include it, but I felt like, you know, if this can fund 3 mana for the Dragon, we get it haste, you know, this thing can come down on turn 6, 5, you know, and just kind of hit really big and kind of be unexpected. I will say every time I've casted Jeweled Lotus to cast the Dragon, it has overperformed quite a bit. Could just be the meta, could be good luck, but every time I draw Jeweled Lotus, whether I cast it the turn I draw it, whether I open it and I cast it on turn 6, it's just always gas, and not many people will expect a 10/10 flyer to come down on turn 5 or 6. So again, we're not centered around casting the Dragon, but we will take any freebies, free rolls that we can. So Jeweled Lotus, definitely a good inclusion, overperforms for me. And then the last card here is going to be Smothering Tithe. We're 5 color. It's Smothering Tithe. Not a ton to do here. It is a bit annoying of a card to play against. We do play a small package of quote-unquote annoying cards, Smothering Tithe being one of them. These cards are played as fair as they can be, but, you know, in regards to a Dragon Tribal deck, we want to take all the speed we can get. So that's it for kind of like, you know, spell-based ramp. We're going to go down to card draw here. We're going to play 1 copy of Mystic Remora. I'm playing this. I know it's an obnoxious card, but we're trying to play at a higher level. Again, we're a little bit of a slower deck. And I just needed something lower on the curve for card draw. And this kind of fit the bill. It can draw multiple cards, and it can slow the game down for you. If you don't have a Remora, you can always play like Night's Whisper, Charticor, some sort of 1 to 2 mana card draw spell. But Mystic Remora kind of fit the slowing the game down thing. One of my favorite cards, actually, Painful Truths. So 1 black and 2 as Converge. So you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the mana color spent for the spell. So you're playing 5 color. We have a really good mana base. So this is always going to be a 3 mana draw 3, which I think is a fantastic rate. It does fit the bill in being a lower mana cost. 3 mana is kind of where we want to cap out with some of these draw spells. We do play a couple heavier mana draw spells, but they have such a unique value to the deck. So one of my favorite cards, if you're playing a 5 color deck, you need some low-end card draw as far as mana cost. Go for it. And then kind of the third card, I guess in the annoying package, is Rhystic Study. We need card draw. We need it cheap. Again, it's kind of that slowing the game down ability. And you are playing 5 colors, so you know, if you have the budget, you are in the realm of just kind of playing the best cards that you want. So we'll go with Rhystic Study. This card here, Temur Ascendancy, is going to cover 2 categories. It's going to cover a small category of hastiness, because we want our dragons to have haste, and also card draw. So it costs Temur, so it costs green, blue, red. All your creatures have haste, and then whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, you draw a card. This does include tokens. We do have a tokeny sub-theme going on. Dragons do cost a lot of mana, so we can't play 30-40 dragons like, you know, something like a Sliver deck or a Goblin deck would. We have to play kind of the low to mid-20s. So whenever a creature enters the battlefield, it's going to replace itself, and it's going to have haste. Kind of the best value you can get. One of my favorite cards in the deck as far as enchantments go. And then we have some 5 mana card draw here. Return of the Wild Speaker and Stinging Study. Return of the Wild Speaker, I kind of go back and forth between like this, Rishkard's Expertise, and I kind of just have settled on Return of the Wild Speaker because it costs 1 less mana, which is nice. It's modal, so you can give all your creatures +3/+3, or draw equal to the greatest power of creatures as long as they're not human. And the fact that it is an instant definitely weighs heavier to me than Rishkard's Expertise. So I did settle on the Return of the Wild Speaker. You can play Rishkards if you'd like, if that's more your play style. I also do sub this out occasionally for greater good. For playing something against like a meta with heavier single target removal, which I have two play groups. One plays lighter removal, one plays pretty heavy. Greater Good's pretty good. They go to remove your dragon, you sack a dragon, draw 6, discard 3. And then Stinging Study, it's 1 black and 1. Draw X, lose X, where X is the mana value of your commander. So 5 mana, draw 10. Awesome. I'll take that all day, every day. The life is almost irrelevant because you're just going to win shortly from thereafter if you draw 10 cards. But the fact that it is instant speed too, right? Being able to deploy some dragons and hold up some mana and cast things when you want. Really, really good for the interaction piece of this deck. And then the last one in the heavier card draw category, or pseudo-heavier card draw category, is Kindred Discovery. The blue 3. Choose a creature type when it comes to the board. You're obviously going to choose dragons. Whenever a dragon attacks or enters the battlefield, you're going to draw a card. So this is really, really good with any of the dragons we deploy, any of the token synergies we have. And then obviously dragons, as of Tarkir, when Tarkir came out, there's a lot of when a dragon attacks abilities. So this kind of synergizes with that. Kindred Discovery, of all the tribal cards out there, this is one of my favorites. Again, an overperformer, especially when we have that tokeny sub-theme going on. If you don't have a Kindred Discovery, you can also play a Garruk's Uprising, or if you wanted to sub out any of the other card draw spells. Garruk's Uprising is a fine budget replacement. And then kind of going into the last card draw / ramp is Great Henge. Again, this could be subbed for something like Garruk's Uprising or Elemental Bond, whatever you would like. But again, we're on a higher budget. So it costs 7 green, costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Big dragons, it's going to cost 2, 3, 4 mana easy. Tap to refund 2 green, immediately gain 2 life. And then whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on it. I will take it all day, every day. That seems to be a fantastic ability. Great Henge is nuts. Non-token, so we lose out on some of those token synergies, but you still can't pass up Great Henge. Into the removal category, right? Single target pinpoint removal. We're going to start with Nature's Claim. I kind of auto-include this in any green deck. 1 mana, nuke, artifact, or enchantment. One of the themes with the single targeted instant speed interaction that we have in this deck, you want it to cost as cheap as possible. 1 to 3 mana is the sweet spot, because if we're deploying a dragon that costs 4 or 5, sometimes 6 mana, up to 9 mana, we do want to be able to hold up 1, 2, 3 mana for some interaction. So Nature's Claim, just absolutely one of my favorites. If you're heavier, you need to remove some creatures, you can always play like Swords to Plowshares or something. Assassin's Trophy for more single target removal. Versatile, hits any permanent. Again, in that cheap mana category we're looking for. And then we play 2 counterspells. I'm not a super counterspell happy guy, but we want to protect our board and be able to protect our investment, so to speak, in the amount of mana. So we're going to go with Swan Song and Mana Drain. If you don't have Mana Drain, you can play Stubborn Denial, which is 1 mana counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. But more importantly, that same card has Ferocious. So if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, it just counters it completely. I believe it's non-creature spell, actually. I'd have to go back and double check. But a fine replacement for Mana Drain if you don't have it. But again, all 3 of those cards, they're 1 to 2 mana. Swan Song is just 1 mana, gives them a bird, irrelevant. And then obviously Mana Drain counters any spell, but it's going to refund you based on the cost. So it will ramp you a little bit, which is very, very nice. We're going to go with Aura Shards. This is a flex slot. Sometimes this comes out for Swords to Plowshares, depending on the play group. But 3 mana, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, which include our dragon token sub-theme, nuke an artifact or enchantment, it's a little bit of a pet card of mine, so that's why it kind of comes in the deck. It will replace itself in the deck more than it comes out, just because it is a pet card of mine. But great, one of my favorites. Anguish Unmaking, it's capped out on the 3 mana instant speed, which is where we want to be at the most, but it does exile a non-land permanent, so we're keeping Anguish Unmaking in there. We have a good mana base, so the mana cost is irrelevant. So that's it for spell-based single target removal. We're going to go into some just good cards. I like to put the verbiage power cards on them, so they're kind of good in any scenario. So first we're going to start with the tutors here. We have Enlightened Tutor, Vampiric, Worldly, and Demonic. Again, we're playing Dragon Tribal. It has, it only has so high of a ceiling, but it is very fun, and this deck does get pretty fast. Some of that comes into the fact that we are playing some tutors. So Enlightened Tutor is going to get an artifact or enchantment. Vampiric and Demonic will grab anything, and Worldly grabs a creature. One of the things about this deck is Dragon Tempest is like just an insane card, the single best card in the deck. So 3 of these will let us see our Dragon Tempest. Worldly Tutor will let us see the kind of the creature-y version of that. So we want to play these tutors to kind of keep up with efficiency. If you're trying to trim the budget, take down the power of this deck, you can cut these. But the way this deck performs with something like Dragon Tempest on the board versus when it has no Dragon Tempest is like you can clearly see the difference. Not to say that it's not good without Dragon Tempest, but it is a different game, so to speak. So we play the tutors to see our Dragon Tempest and anything else we would need in a scenario. Tutors are tutors. And then a little bit of a protection category here. We're going to go with Steal Resolve, Lightning Greaves, and some instant speed interaction and Teferi's Protection. So not a ton to talk about with Teferi's Protection. It's instant speed interaction at 3 mana, the top of the curve where we want to be. Protects your entire board. Lightning Greaves is a card that kind of comes in and out based on kind of what I feel for the time. It's just a very flex slot. But giving your creature Haste and Shroud for just a 2 mana investment that could bounce back and forth between things definitely performs pretty well. And then Steely Resolve. When it comes to the board, you choose a creature type. We're going to choose dragons. Creatures of the chosen type essentially have Shroud. This was a card, so I've been working on this deck, piecing it together for about 2 years. This is one of the cards I bought towards the tail end of piecing my deck together. And I was like, I mean, it seems like it would be decent, but it is, it is just Shroud, and you kind of need a board established to deploy your board. But again, this card definitely qualifies in the category of overperformance. 2 mana on turn 2, just slamming a Steely Resolve on the board, or turn 3 really puts your opponents in kind of a tight spot, because they know like anything deployed from here on out is very, very difficult to interact with. So that's why I like Steely Resolve. As you're kind of, maybe you already have a bigger board, right? And you're kind of deploying your big dragons, slamming a Steely Resolve once you're already established will force your opponents into, unoptimal interaction with you. And it is really, really cool. So definitely Steely Resolve, one of the overperformers. I know this card crept up in price. You could play like any protection spell you want over any of these. I'm not a huge fan of Swiftfoot Boots just because we have the budget, but you could also play Swiftfoot Boots. And then in the hasty category, again, we have the infamous Dragon Tempest and Rhythm of the Wild. Rhythm of the Wild, pretty straightforward. Creatures have Riot and they can't be countered. So it all they give them haste or a +1/+1 counter as long as they're non-token. And your creature spells are uncounterable. The higher you go in power level, the more relevant that is. But more importantly, it's haste. It's a haste enabler. That's why it's in there. Dragon Tempest, 1 red and 1, the best card in the deck, hands down. Flying creatures have haste, and whenever a dragon enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. So all your token spawners, right? This stuff's going to stack up really, really quick. Pseudo removal for creatures. It'll be play removal at some point. But if I have, 4 dragons on the board and I make dragon number 5, I get to nuke something for 5 damage, whether it's a creature, player, yada, 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 and it gives you haste. So this is a really, really powerful card. Definitely the top card in the deck. Can't say more about it. And then the last power card we have is Finale of Devastation. This is one of the win conditions. You can actually play whatever you want. I've actually only resolved this card a couple times. It was pretty good every time you resolve it, but it's one of those cards where you could pour a ton of mana into. So 2 green and X, search your graveyard or library for a creature card. Creatures you control get +X/+X, and then if X is 10 or more, they all gain haste. So you're gonna slam it on the board, pour as much mana as you need to into it, and just win. Not a ton to say about Finale. One of those cards where you can cut as you please for any win condition you would like. So we have board wipes. Toxic Deluge and Cyclonic Rift. Not a ton to say about them. Cyclonic Rift is Cyclonic Rift. Deluge I really like in this deck just because it can be one-sided. Normally you just have the biggest creatures on the board. So you could essentially make this board wipe one-sided. Some really cool interactions with a card like Nesting Dragon, which I've done before. Don't want to dwell too much on these. They're kind of like the best wipes in the game. And then I consider it in the board wipe category, but it's one Ugin. He's in here kind of for flavor and theme, if anything. Ugin is pretty good, but most of the time you're using him as a board wipe. So this card can come out. You can cut this for like Crux of Fate. I've debated that. If you feel, sometimes I feel like the deck doesn't need another board wipe. You just put like one of your favorite dragons in. So there's a couple cards I want to test, like Sign of Draco and a couple other things. But he is a board wipe. I mean, he is kind of like the best Planeswalker you can play in the format, arguably. But again, it's a totally cuttable card. All right, so kind of the most fun part of the profile is the dragons, right? So keep in mind, the mana value of all the dragons you see actually cost, one less than what's printed on the card due to the Dragon. So this is a newer card. I cut a Colligan for this, so we're kind of testing this out. But this is 2 red and 1 flyer. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you just make an XX Dragon Illusion, where X is the mana value of the card, and then you exile the token at the beginning of the end step. Obviously, it has haste. But we're playing dragons, right? I think we're playing 23 dragons. Because you can't play 30, 40 dragons. They just cost too much mana. So we do play a lot of spells, and being able to cast Kindred Discovery, make a 5/5, trigger all of our cool dragon tribal synergies. Not a ton of testing with this card, but it does seem good in theory. I did cut a Colligan for that if you wanted to go down a safer path. One of the newer cards that came out, Dragonborn Champion, 1 red, 1 green, 1, has Trample, 5/3. But whenever a source you control deals 5 or more damage to a player, you draw a card. So any source. That could be a big unblockable flying dragon. That could be off of Terror of the Peaks ability. That could be off of Dragon Tempest. But this is like the most consistent card drawing engine, I believe, in the deck. Really, really excited when it came out in the pre-con. But Dragonborn Champion, hands down, it falls into the overperformer category. 1 copy Goldspan Dragon, 2 red and 2. One of my favorite cards. Again, another card that came out within the last year and a half that is just an overperformer. 2 red and 2, flyer haste. Static ability, treasures tap for 2 mana instead of 1, which is crazy. And then whenever it attacks or is targeted, you make a treasure. So it's instantly going to refund 2 of the 4 mana you spent on it in the form of a treasure. And as we kind of go through the profile, you have Goldspan, you have Dockside, Smothering Tithe, as well as a few other cards. You realize we have like some treasure synergies going on here. So Goldspan Dragon, one of the newer dragons printed. Again, just a nutty card. Terror of the Peaks, one of the best cards as far as dragons go. Again, a lot of our good dragons are in that 4 mana slot. 2 red and 2 flyer. If your opponent targets it, it basically has ward 3 life. But whenever another creature enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So, if this is on the board and we make an 8/8 dragon token, right, we're going to nuke something for 8. We use Teneb the Harvester to reanimate a dragon. We're going to hit them for, whatever Teneb the Harvester entered the battlefield at, plus whatever we reanimated. Just good dragon overall. Kind of falls into the creature removal suite. But it does get out of hand, especially when you start stacking the abilities like with Dragon Tempest. Nesting Dragon, 2 red and 2. Again, one of the cards that when I was building this deck, I was like, this card seems okay. But, as you kind of try to curve out the 4 mana slot, there's not a ton of just absolutely insane cards. But we try to make them as good as possible. So this is a 5/4 flyer with landfall, make a 0/2 egg. When the egg dies, you create a 2/2 dragon with fire breathing. So if you cast this on turn 3 or 4, play a fetch land, grab another land, turn 4 or 5, play a fetch land, grab another land. You've made 4 of these little egg tokens, which you could use to chump block. I've had like 8 dragon egg tokens and then toxic deluge the board for like 3. And then hatched like 10 2/2s with Dragon Tempest on the board. You can see how things would get kind of crazy, but in the 4 mana slot, I think it holds it down pretty well. No complaints there. And then these cards kind of fall in the same category. Dragonlord Ojutai and Emerith. I needed some more card draw, but I needed it in the form of a dragon to kind of keep my synergies going. So they both cost 4 mana, both have flying. Ojutai has hexproof as long as it's untapped. Emerith has ward 4, which is essentially hexproof. So when Ojutai attacks, you look at the top 3 cards and add 1 to your hand, essentially. And when Emerith attacks, you draw a card, and if you have 3 or less cards, you draw to the difference. They both fulfill the same purpose. Ojutai just gives you the best card among the top 3. instantly replaces itself. Even more value if it has haste. Emryth is going to draw you that card, and if you've burned through your hand and kind of missed your card draw spells, it's going to draw you 2 or 3 additional cards. Again, on the curve at 4 mana, and they replace themselves, so they fit the build quite well. Scourge of Valkis, a card I kind of forgot to talk about as we're talking about dragon synergies, but he's 3 red and 1 flyer. Whenever it enters the battlefield, or whenever Scourge or another dragon enters the battlefield, deals X damage, where X is the number of dragons you control, and it has fire breathing. So it's going to simulate Dragon Tempest in the form of a dragon, which is really nice. Gets out of hand. And then pseudo removal, we have Wasitora. So it's Jund in 1, Flample. But whenever it attacks, if it hits that player has to sacrifice a creature. And if they can't, you make a 3/3. The 3/3 is here nor there. You great if you make it, great if you don't. But, you know, if you're playing like Voltron decks or decks that, you know, don't play a million creatures on the board, or you have that one player that kind of has that annoying threat, you just swing into him and make him sacrifice it. Gets around indestructibility, hexproof, things like that. And last in the 4 slot, we have Dragon Broodmother, which is triple red, green, and 1 flying. At the beginning of each upkeep, you make a 1/1 dragon with Devour 2. So your upkeep and your opponent's upkeep. The Devour is here nor there. You know, occasionally it comes in handy, but it does spawn a dragon at each upkeep, which trigger all your dragon synergies, your Tempest, your Scourge, your Terror of the Peaks, Kindred Discovery, yada, yada, yada. So kind of makes for some really cool plays. Again, in the 4 slot, we have some really, really strong choices. Going into 5, we have Scion. Kind of can be your pseudo commander if you wanted. Definitely not optimized for Scion, but, you know, you do you. Essentially, it costs Wooburg, flyer, pay 2. It becomes the best dragon in your deck at that time. Again, kind of keeps things going, but if I needed any dragon at any time, it's going to become that. Pet card of mine, Vivictus Asmati the Dire, Jund in 2, flyer. Essentially, when it attacks, you get to pseudo Chaos Warp. So I target a permanent on each player's board, and we all, including mine, and we all sacrifice them. Then at the same time, we all flip the top card of our library, and if it's a permanent, it comes into play. So a couple cool things here is I get to choose them. So I'm going to choose my opponent's best things, and my dead mana rock, my dead land, one of my mana dorks, use Dockside, whatever, and we're all going to flip the top card, and they're going to get something most likely suboptimal, and I'm going to flip a big dragon. In the overperformer category, I love this card. It's a pet card of mine. If you don't like it, you can cut it, but definitely one of my favorites. In the board wipe category, I include Silumgar. This is one of those cards that you can bounce back and forth between like Balefire Dragon. I just like the modular and the customization, so to speak, of it, where you can, you know, put -1 on each board based on what you need and which dragons you attack with. And whereas Balefire, it just hits one player and hits everything for 6 on their board. Again, it doesn't get around things like Indestructible, but it is a strong card. This, I can swing 2 dragons into person A, 1 dragon into person B, and really kind of customize the board wipe in that regards. It also has flying and hexproof. Again, a card you can sub out if you wanted to, but I do like Silumgar. 1 Dragonlord Jamoka, green, white, and 3. Flying lifelink. It can't be countered, and your spells can't be countered, essentially, during your turn. Your opponent cannot interact with spells. They can interact with you with abilities, but definitely not spells. Stronger as you go up the chain in power level, but again, a solid card. I like Jamoka a lot. And then a win con in the creature category is Scourge of the Throne. 2 red and 3 flyer, has Dethrone. But most importantly, when it attacks the player with the highest life total, you untap and you get an additional combat phase. So again, it's going to be that win condition. Play your big dragons, give them a haste, swing in, trigger all your tribal synergies, untap, kill another player. Again, a card reprinted within like the last year and a half. Hellkite Courser. It's going to cost 2 red and 3 flyer. Really cool ability. So when it enters the battlefield, you grab your commander and just play it, and it has haste. Doesn't cast it, just plays it. So essentially on turn 5, turn 4, if you've ramped, you're just doming somebody for 10 with the Ur-Dragon. That early in the game, really hard to interact. Don't see that coming. And if they do want to interact with like a Swords or a Path or something, it's going to go back to the command zone with no commander tax, and you've invested, 5 mana into something. You got 2 bodies. Again, really solid card. Being able to dome somebody on turn 4 is awesome, and drawing a couple free cards too. One Lathless, another one of our token makers, 2 red and 3 flying. Whenever a non-token dragon enters, create a 5/5, and then dragons have fire breathing for 1 red and 1. Again, part of that tokeny sub-theme. I've actually cut Lathless and put her back in a few times. She always makes her way in just because such an efficient token maker. And then we're going to go on to some minor reanimation. I don't have a huge reanimation package in here because we're trying to win before that matters. But it's nice to have that in case you get stopped. Teneb, green, white, black, and 2 flyer. When it hits, you pay black and 2, reanimate a creature card. Very, very straightforward. Bladewing, I'm kind of going back and forth between removing this or not. It does cost a lot, costs 6, but essentially, you know, when it comes to the board, you're going to pick a dragon and play it. Triggers all your dragon tribal synergies, and then for Rakdos, dragons get +1/+1. I want to play a little bit more with Bladewing. The times I have played it, it's been solid, but it is a larger investment, so definitely cuttable. And then Tiamat, I mean, of course we got to play Tiamat on cast. It's only going to cost 6 in this deck. You're going to get the best 5 dragons and put them in your hand. Vary based on the situation, but not a ton to say. Your best 5 dragons are coming in your hand to deploy on that turn. And then in the ramp category as a creature, we have Old Gnawbone. Again, another dragon printed in the last year. 2 green and 4 flyer, but whenever a creature deals damage, you create that many treasures, which is insane. We have some treasure synergies going on in here, so not a ton to say about Old Gnawbone. Fantastic. If you're more on a budget, you can play Clouth from the Precon. It's going to perform just as fine, but I do believe Old Gnawbone is the better card. But again, on a budget, Clouth will do similar things for you, or maybe something like Savage Vetmaw. One of our game enders, Atarka, red, green, and 4 Flample. Dragons gain double strike when they attack. You're going to slam Scion, clone it, attack. You're going to slam this on the board, but essentially you're just looking to win the turn you have Atarka. Again, giving, a bunch of 6/6s double strike. I mean, the game's going to close out fairly quick. And then the last dragon of the deck, Utvara Hellkite. At face value, I don't really like this card a ton. 6 mana, 6 colorless and 2 red. 8 mana, I'm not super bought in for. In this deck, it costs 5 and 2, so 7. I'm a little bit more for it. Flyer, whenever a dragon attacks, you create a 6/6. So kind of at the floor, if you attack with 4 dragons, you're making 4 6/6s that can then attack the next turn. But where this card gets a little crazy and a little nutty with the synergies is if you have something like Dragon Tempest, Tear of the Peaks, Scourge of Valkis. If I attack with 4 dragons, I'm making 4 6/6s, which would trigger Dragon Tempest an additional 4 times, scale upwards. Same with Scourge, same with Tear of the Peaks. So it does have a bit more use in that regard. So the times that I am able to slam it on the board with something like Dragon Tempest, it is very good. And I'm more high on the card when it costs 7 mana as opposed to 8. But again, you can play any big threat in that slot if you want. So my favorite part of all decks is the land base. So we're going to kind of trim through this really quick here, but we are in a higher budget, so we are playing all of the shock lands. They're actually at a pretty good price right now. I recommend if you don't have something like these in your collection, just pick them up. But essentially, they are basic land types. They can come into play untapped, and they tap for 2 colors. So they are fetchable. They do help you fix your colors. So we have the 10 shocks. And going in with that, obviously, we have our 10 fetch lands. Being at a 5 color, it is harder to build it on a budget. I will say they've come out with a lot of good lands in the last 1.5 to 2 years. But again, if you're trying to optimize, this is the way to go. You can play over these. You can play like the Innistrad lands or any other cool untapped dual lands that you would like. But again, the best way to do it is with fetches. We are playing 2 Triomes that are kind of the ones that we have in our colors. So we're playing Ketria and Zagoth. 1 taps for black, blue, green. Green being our primary color. Blue and black being our subcolors. And then 1 taps for green, red, blue. Again, green and red being our primary colors in this deck. These are the 2 Triomes that we go with because we can fetch them early. Coming in top doesn't matter. If we draw them late game, they cycle. I went with a couple crowd lands just because I did have some gaps in the mana base. So I went with the crowd lands that touch base on 1 or more of our main colors. So I went with green, red, and green, blue. And then I went with black, red, and green, black. So they touch base on our subcolors, but each one will have one of our primary colors in there. So that's why I kind of went with the crowd lands. You could play more if you're on a different budget. And then here we have rainbow lands. We have Command Tower, City of Brass, Mana Confluence, Reflecting Pool, which essentially will tap to make any color that you can produce. So if you have one of these rainbow lands and slam down Reflecting Pool, it's going to make any color. Exotic Orchard, an underrated land, I think, especially in 5 color, but it's going to make any color. I mean, you have 4 opponents. Forbidden Orchard, one of the cards you don't have to play, but again, we are on a higher budget. Rainbow land, tap to add 1 mana of any color, and then an opponent is going to get a 1/1. The 1/1's irrelevant. I mean, you could use it to gain some good faith. And then Cavern of Souls, tap for any color, make your things counterable. And then 1 copy of Haven. More of a utility land with Haven than anything, but tap for 1, tap to add a mana of any color, and then 2 and tap it, sack it to grab a dragon from your graveyard or an Ugin. So kind of some cool spiciness in there. And then the last part, we have the utility lands. We have 1 Yavimaya. I'm actually going to cut this for Balaged Recovery. I find that card to be a little bit better, so that'll be Balaged Recovery. 1 Ancient Tomb, taps for 2 mana. 1 Gaia's Cradle. You don't have to play the Cradle. I kind of had a gold bordered one laying around, so I opted to play it. It's not nutty in this deck. You're not tapping for 30, 40 mana. You're tapping for 5, 6, 7 mana at best. So very fair way to play the card. You can cut this for any land you want. You could play Balaged Recovery, the Yavimaya. You can play Urborg. I mean, you can really play any land you'd like in that slot. And then 1 copy of Urza's Saga. Being that we are investing into bigger mana cost to have a lot of colorless mana in the cost, being able to fetch the Soul Ring out kind of as soon as possible, very, very solid. Or we can get the Jeweled Lotus off this, or if we need fixing, I believe the Jeweled Lotus, you would never grab Mana Crypt unless you have Soul Ring already, but it'll kind of ramp you early. So that's kind of why we went with the Urza Saga. And again, guys, that is my Dragon deck. Rate, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions, I do love to interact with people in the comments section or DM. If you want to see something a little bit more budget, if you want to see different Dragon style commanders, but I will, any day of the week, I will brew a Dragon deck. It's kind of just what I like to do. Again, any feedback, any new cards that you've tried that you're like, you know, man, you really got to try this card. And I have plenty of other decks as well, various budgets. I have a high budget Sliver deck. I have some lower budget, you know, Yuriko decks, landfall stuff, Yarok, Goblins. So if you want to see something on the channel that I might have, just let me know, whether it's a deck or a color pair. And if it's something you really want to see, I'll go ahead, I'll invest in it, I'll buy it based on a different budget. But yeah, thanks guys, I appreciate you watching. Any questions? Have a good one.